It started on a quiet summer morning, the kind of morning where the sky is still painted in soft blue, and the neighborhood smells of freshly cut grass and dew. Birds were scattered across rooftops. The lake shimmered in the distance, and the streets inside the gated community were almost too perfect. Manicured lawns, freshly painted fences, and driveways without a single oil stain. But behind that picture-perfect calm, tension was brewing, and it all revolved around one vehicle. The Jeep sat there, parked neatly at the edge of a driveway. It wasn't flashy, but it wasn't ordinary either. Its dark green paint, sturdy build, and heavy-duty tires gave it an unmistakable presence. To anyone who glanced, it looked like a personal vehicle, maybe a little too rugged for a suburban neighborhood filled with minivans and sports cars. But to me, it was more than a car. That Jeep wasn't just transportation, it was a tool, a piece of equipment tied to something bigger, something that most of the neighbors would never understand. And yet, there was one person who believed she understood everything. She ruled the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom, the HOA president, the woman everyone called Karen. Karen's voice was sharp enough to slice through the morning air. I wasn't outside yet, but I could hear her from inside my house. The words were muffled at first, then clearer as she marched across the sidewalk, her heels clicking like gunshots against the pavement. "This is not allowed here," she barked. "This thing, it violates community standards." I peeked through the blinds. There she was, blonde hair styled stiff as a helmet, a tailored navy suit despite the summer heat, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. She stood in front of my Jeep, one finger jabbing at it like she was ordering it to vanish on command. Two neighbors had stopped their morning walks to watch. A golden retriever sat on the grass, tilting its head as if even it couldn't figure out what the commotion was about. Karen didn't care who was watching. She thrived on an audience. "This car is an eyesore!" She snapped again, louder now. "We are a respectable community, not a military base." Her voice cracked with self-righteous energy, and I could see her already scribbling notes onto her clipboard. Notes that I knew would soon transform into threats of fines, letters slipped under my door, or calls to the HOA board. Most people in this neighborhood learned quickly. You don't argue with Karen, but I wasn't most people. Still, I didn't step outside, not yet. Instead, I let her rant, let her feel in control for those few moments. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this Jeep wasn't just mine. It belonged to an operation she had no business interfering with. By mid-morning, I finally opened the front door, keeping my tone calm, almost casual. "Morning," I said. Karen whipped around like she'd been caught in the act, but her expression didn't soften. If anything, it sharpened. "You need to move this vehicle," she said immediately, skipping pleasantries. "It violates HOA regulations. Section 12, subsection 4. No oversized commercial or military-style vehicles may be parked in driveways." I leaned against the door frame, not answering right away. The silence frustrated her. "Well," she pressed, "are you going to comply?" I finally smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. "It's parked on my property, in my driveway, and it's not going anywhere." The words hit her like gasoline on fire. Her lips tightened, and her hand gripped the clipboard until her knuckles turned white. "You think you're special," she hissed. "But this neighborhood has rules, and rules apply to everyone." I didn't flinch. "Some rules don't apply to this Jeep." Her eyes narrowed. She thought I was being smug, rebellious. In truth, I was being careful. I wasn't lying. The Jeep wasn't a normal vehicle, and it wasn't bound by her suburban laws. But that was a truth she wasn't ready for. From that moment, the battle lines were drawn. Over the next few days, she escalated. Notes appeared on my windshield. Handwritten warnings slid into my mailbox. She even knocked on my door at dinner time, demanding I attend an HOA meeting. Each time, I refused to bend. Each time, her anger grew sharper, more desperate. Neighbors started whispering. Some sided with her, afraid of what might happen if Karen's authority was challenged. Others watched in secret amusement, enjoying the rare sight of someone standing up to the queen of the cul-de-sac. But Karen didn't want whispers or half-wins. She wanted control. And control, to her, meant getting rid of my Jeep. It happened on a Thursday morning. The sun had barely risen, and the air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked pavement. I woke to the faint sound of metal clanging, At first, I thought it was just a neighbor's construction project, but then I heard the unmistakable snap of metal giving way. I moved quickly but carefully, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. Karen stood at the edge of my driveway, bolt cutters in hand. The padlock that secured my gate lay broken on the concrete. She wasn't alone this time. A tow truck idled on the street, its driver shifting nervously in his seat, clearly uneasy about what he'd been asked to do. Karen, on the other hand, was electric with fury. She gestured wildly at my Jeep, shouting at the driver to back in and hook it up. Her voice echoed off the houses. "This is an illegal vehicle," she screamed. "It doesn't belong here." "Get it out." The driver hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? I mean, looks like it's locked up for a reason." Karen thrust the broken lock into the air like proof of victory. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority. Do your job." I stepped outside then, slow and deliberate, my footsteps cutting through the tension like a drum beat. Her head snapped toward me, but this time, her confidence wavered. "You broke into my property," I said, my voice low, steady. "That's not authority. That's trespassing." She didn't back down. "Not fully. I'm enforcing the rules. If you won't listen, then I'll make sure your car is gone." But before she could say another word, something changed. The sound of engines in the distance, not loud but steady, growing closer. Two dark SUVs rolled into the neighborhood, their tinted windows glinting under the rising sun. They stopped near my driveway, doors opening in unison. 3 men stepped out, their presence commanding, unmistakable. They weren't neighbors. They weren't here for small-town drama. They were here for the Jeep. Karen froze, her bolt cutters slipping from her hand and clattering onto the driveway. The tow truck driver muttered something under his breath, already climbing back into his cab, desperate to leave. The man in front, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a plain green t-shirt, scanned the scene. His eyes landed on the broken lock, then on Karen. And that's when it happened, the shift. The moment when Karen realized she hadn't just been fighting an HOA battle. She had cut her way into something far bigger, far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The Jeep didn't belong to me, not really. It belonged to them. And in that instant, the suburban battlefield transformed into something Karen couldn't control. The silence after the SUVs pulled up was heavier than any shouting Karen had done in days. Even the birds had gone quiet, as though the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The morning sun cut long shadows across the driveway, and for the first time, Karen didn't look like the queen of the cul-de-sac. She looked cornered. The man in the green shirt stepped closer, his boots hitting the pavement with deliberate weight. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He just looked at her, his eyes sharp, calm, unblinking. That kind of calm was scarier than rage. "Step away from the vehicle," he said. His voice was steady, controlled, but it carried an authority Karen had never faced. She stammered, her hands twitching like she couldn't decide whether to grab her clipboard or hide it. This is a violation of community rules," she tried, her voice cracking. It's against the HOA bylaws to—" The man cut her off without raising his tone. "This Jeep is federal property, and you've just tampered with it." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Karen blinked, confused, then laughed nervously, as if she thought this was still some kind of neighborhood squabble she could win. "Federal property? Don't be ridiculous. It's just a Jeep!" The man turned his head slightly, and behind him one of the other officers popped open the back of the SUV. A black case was lifted out, its silver latches snapping open to reveal files, badges and gear Karen had only seen in movies. The sight drained the color from her face. I stood off to the side, watching. This was no longer my battle. The task force had arrived, and with them, a shift in the balance of power so sharp it was almost visible. The neighbors had gathered now, doors cracked open, blinds lifted, people standing at the edges of their lawns. They weren't pretending anymore. They wanted to see what would happen when Karen's unstoppable force met something immovable. The man in the green shirt took another step forward, close enough now that Karen had to tilt her head to look up at him. "You cut a federal lock," he said slowly, making sure every word landed. "You attempted to remove a federal asset. That is not a community violation. That is a federal crime." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her clipboard trembled in her grip before she let it fall to the pavement. The tow truck driver muttered, "Nope," fired up his engine, and sped away, leaving her stranded. For a long moment, no one moved. Then almost mechanically, Karen took a step back. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced by something I had never seen in her before, fear. But the task force didn't push further. They didn't cuff her, didn't drag her away. They didn't have to. The weight of what she'd done was already pressing down on her shoulders. Instead, the man turned toward me. His expression softened slightly, but his eyes still carried that unshakable intensity. "We'll take it from here," he said. I nodded. No more words were needed. The Jeep was checked over, carefully inspected to ensure nothing had been tampered with beyond the lock. Karen tried to speak again, mumbling excuses, insisting she didn't know, that she thought it was just some oversized car. But each attempt sputtered out under the weight of silence. By the time the task force loaded their equipment back into the SUVs, Karen looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not physically, but in presence. Her kingdom had crumbled. Yet the story didn't end there. That evening, word spread faster than wildfire. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around 2 nights later, the clubhouse was packed. People who hadn't shown up in months were suddenly front and center, eager to witness the fallout. Karen sat at the head of the long table, but the authority she usually radiated was gone. Her hair was less polished. Her eyes darted nervously, and for once, the clipboard stayed untouched. The murmurs in the room were loud enough to rattle the walls. Neighbors weren't just curious, they were angry. Angry that their president had crossed a line that could have dragged the entire community into trouble. One man stood up, his voice sharp. "You broke into someone's property. You called a tow truck on a vehicle you didn't understand. You endangered all of us." Another neighbor chimed in. "What if that had interfered with an investigation? What if your power trip cost lives?" Karen tried to defend herself. "I was enforcing the rules." "That Jeep?" But she was cut off by a chorus of voices, louder this time, unified in outrage. For years, people had endured her micromanagement, her fines, her constant demands. But now they had a reason to push back, and they weren't going to waste it. I didn't attend that meeting. I didn't need to. I already knew how it would end. By the following week, Karen was no longer HOA president. Officially, she had resigned for personal reasons. Unofficially, she'd been forced out by the very people she once controlled. The clipboard was gone, the sharp voice silenced, the kingdom dismantled. And me? I went back to life as usual. The Jeep remained in the driveway when it wasn't needed elsewhere, its dark green frame blending into the quiet suburbia that had almost swallowed it whole. But every time I looked at it, I was reminded of how fragile the illusion of control could be. Because Karen thought she was the law of that neighborhood. She thought she could bend reality to fit her rules. But she didn't realize that some battles go beyond HOA bylaws and neighborhood pride. She didn't realize she had picked a fight with the wrong Jeep. In the weeks that followed, the whispers died down, replaced by nods of respect from neighbors who once kept their distance. Some of them still didn't know the whole story, and they never would. That was fine by me. The Jeep's true purpose wasn't for gossip. It was for work far beyond those white picket fences. But I'll never forget the look on Karen's face when the task force stepped out of those SUVs, the moment her empire collapsed in the shadow of a truth she couldn't control. It was the look of someone who had finally realized power built on fear is nothing when real power arrives. And in that quiet, perfect neighborhood, she learned that lesson the hard way.